Ready to go?
You rolling?
Yep.
I wish we could listen to the song first. Can we play the song then?
Oh, you're going to play which one?
Oh, we got a theme song.
Oh, you've got a thing. Oh, I thought
Yeah,
you were going
this
to do
is-
one of your politically inspired pieces.
Oh, no. We can't keep that separate.
Oh, right.
Welcome to How Not to Be an Asshole. I don't know which episode this is.
We never know because we never know what order we're going to put it out in.
It's a well-oiled machine, though.
Yeah, remember we have to introduce ourselves. I'm Todd Williams, aka Louis Nux. Dom hates introing himself. I don't know
I'm
why.
Dominic, not Dom. Name's Dominic.
Okay.
And,
Ooh.
I'm glad we've cleared all of these things up.
yeah, and
And this is Dan.
Hi, again.
It's Dan Morby.
two people this week, Dan, asked about you. They called you Enigma, and they said that you need your own mic, but...
They want to know more.
Can't afford it.
Well, I didn't say we couldn't afford it. I tried to act like it was on purpose that we only had 3 mics.
Hey, you got a secret you want to let out the bag just to give the listeners a little more insight into your...
I'll think of something.
Okay, cool. We'll get back to that later. Once again, we have to thank Leon Taylor for doing our design.
We're going to thank them every time.
Why not? It takes like 5 seconds. You're
Alright.
so ungrateful. Cameron Robertson for doing the photos. And
This is just shit I normally skip over when I listen to a podcast. I hate to think of people.
yeah, don't worry.
Yeah. All right.
And you ungrateful bastard, and what's his name?
Matt Short.
Matt Short for doing the theme music.
That we're not allowed to listen to.
Okay, yeah. We're pretty excited about our guest today. Do you want to do the intro?
Do I have to do it?
Yeah.
Is that your enthusiastic face?
Yeah.
Show me some spirit fingers.
Sorry. It's Monday.
Okay. Our guest is a New Zealand politician and member of the Labour Party's shadow cabinet. What is a shadow cabinet?
That basically means the
sneaky.
not in charge version of the government.
Okay.
Yep. So their ministers are the ones that run the show, and then every one of them has an opposite number in Labour. So, yeah. So
It sounds
shadow cabinet
quite
means-
sinister.
That brings me to a good question, but we've got to finish the intro
Alright.
first, eh?
Hold that thought, Todd.
All right.
She joined the Labour Party at a young age and in 2008 became the youngest list MP in Parliament. My phone just turned off. Labour MP for Auckland Central and has been gracious enough to come on our Sorry Excuse for podcast. That's what I wrote last night.
Yay.
Jacinda Ardern. Ardern or Ardern?
I get lots of variation. It's my nana would say Ardern.
All right.
Yeah.
Let's go with what
Well,
Nana
yeah.
says.
You don't want to upset Nana.
She's probably listening too. She's probably...
If you broadcast in heaven, then
Okay.
she's in
Sorry.
No, don't worry, it's not awkward. It was a very long time ago.
Sweet. All good.
And if you believe in
so-
heaven, but it's a whole other podcast.
If heaven's real, I'm sure they've got the internet.
Yep.
Because
I'm sure they're listening to this podcast, broadcasting it.
the afterlife's
My
gonna
nana would have.
the afterlife's gonna be fucking shit if there's no internet. I don't want a part of it.
So what's this question?
So when we first started talking about doing the
Don't tap
podcast,
the table.
you were one of the first people we wanted to get on. Like, you came up right from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so we discussed it. And then, I don't know if you remember, but one night at Golden Dawn, Dom was talking to you. I didn't know it was you, but he was asking if you want to be on the podcast. And I came up behind him and was dry humping him and going, yeah. So I'm really surprised and grateful that you're here, because...
And I'm surprised and grateful that I'm on the opposite side of the table. Right.
I can't remember what I was excited about, but I was excited about something. So, like, Dom's usually a good...
Maybe drinking alcohol?
Yeah, probably.
No,
So
I was happy to come along.
Yeah.
Thanks for
Oh,
the
that's
invite.
cool.
Thanks
Yeah.
for the invite.
I was just wondering after the...
Yeah, he thought he'd fucked it up.
Yeah.
No, look, no.
Okay.
I'm pretty forgiving
Yeah,
sort. So.
cool. That's good
And
of
anyone
you.
who wants to talk about politics, I'm pretty keen to do that because, we don't do that enough. And yet it's the people system. It's meant to be working for them. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of politicians feel quite distant to people. And so we should be more accessible. So I think this is, it's a good thing to do.
So is that something you've been quite conscious of?
Yeah, absolutely. And I especially think that, I hear lots of young people say they don't feel like there are many people who they feel represent them, that kind of, and when they say that, they say, that looks like them, that hangs out in the same places they hang out and want to do similar stuff to what they might want to do. Now, it doesn't mean that I'm the most useful of MPs. I'm not. I'm almost 35. But if we can just make people feel like there's someone who gets it, I guess.
Well, you're definitely the first politician I've talked to in a positive way.
Oh, well,
I called
I
John,
hope
I
that
called John Key a
lasts.
scumbag at a protest the other day.
Yeah.
He looked at me too. I was just like, yes.
But
oh,
the-
actually to his face.
Yeah.
Wow.
He's been walked. Is that they have their party get together, and he was being walked in by his
Walked in,
huge
yeah.
security detail.
Yeah.
Maybe that's why we didn't get a response because we emailed John Key to
You asked
ask
him
if he
to come on
wanted.
the
Yeah.
But maybe now we've got 1,000 listens on
Did
the first
you
one.
Yeah,
dry
maybe
hump
again.
Dominic whilst asking him?
I would love to do that. See, I kind of felt sorry about doing it in front of you, but I would love
I
to.
think they would
I would love to
probably-
make a vulgar display of
I think
myself in
that
front
would
of.
probably blow your chances just quietly.
I don't reckon we have a chance
I
to
maybe
begin
ask
with.
for over the phone. Over the phone.
Do you reckon?
with He might have.
Do you have his
heard about
number?
Some of the songs though. So.
If you can get us his number.
No, we don't really. We don't have opposite the National Party.
What if
phone
there's an
numbers
emergency though?
particularly.
There must be a number you can call.
To be fair, actually, I mean, there have been a couple of occasions where stuff like the fruit fly or civil defence emergencies, where ministers from the National Party will call us.
You come
And that's
together.
good. That's good that they do that.
You know how Dan just disappeared out the room? We
Yes.
told him to get your phone and get John Key's number out of it. So now we have it anyway. So
Yeah, no, I definitely don't have his
We could do a
number.
live cross to John Key.
Yeah. I'm sure he'd be willing and ready to take your call.
Get his sagely advice.
he likes being called Supreme Leader. I reckon that's how we could schmooze him onto the podcast.
I've never heard that one.
Yeah,
Is
that's
that one
apparently what he likes to be called.
Is that one of the rumours, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Oh,
what.
he'll be
Word on the
bitterly
street.
disappointed. That doesn't happen in Parliament, ever.
And how did you end up in the Labour Party?
Do you know, it's funny. Lots of people ask me that, and I don't remember there ever being a moment where I sat down and looked at all the parties and thought about which one I wanted to join. I always remember feeling like I was, the Labour Party, that it was my team. And that's how I describe it to people. I'm like, lots of people feel really strongly about football, and you just feel like it's your team, win or lose, luckily. If
Yeah.
you're loyal enough, and you have to be pretty loyal in
Yeah.
the ups and downs of politics. It's just always felt like my team. It's a gut thing for me. I've always instinctively felt like they tried to do the right thing by people, and I felt like they were there for all the right reasons. They were there for, originally, solidly about workers' rights, and then about all the stuff that mattered to me were the things that they fought for.
Yeah.
So, yeah, they're my team. I formally joined the Labour Party when I was 17, though, but I remember being political a lot longer than that.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's pretty young.
Yeah.
And you're from small town New Zealand, right?
Definitely small town New Zealand.
Yeah, which is weird, because so am I, and I didn't even
Which
know.
bit are you from?
New Plymouth.
I was going to say.
But you're from the arse end of small town New Zealand.
See, technically,
Yeah.
my town would think you were like the big city. So.
Yeah, but
But he's
I
from
reckon,
this part of New Plymouth that most people probably don't get to see.
Yeah. So
Mm.
I was kind of Morrinsville, which is close to Hamilton, which is kind of
yeah.
New Plymouth, but no sea.
Yeah.
So, but Morrinsville was like 5,000 people, really small place.
Yeah, right.
And not a very political. I stood out because I was
Right,
political.
yeah.
My friends always, politely teased me about it.
Yeah.
And no one was left wing, It felt to me anyway.
Right.
So I was the only lefty in the village.
Yeah, I didn't know anyone who was politicized until I moved to Auckland.
Yeah.
And my dad's a Labour man, and when election rolled around, he'd put balloons around the house, but he
Nice.
never explained to me why.
Right.
Like, and I think that's something you find on the left quite often is they don't, because I've been to people's houses whose parents are national voters, and they'll be like, oh, I wouldn't tell you who to vote for, but,
I'm gonna give
and
you my
then they
opinion.
tell you who to vote for,
Yeah, I've got lots of theories on that. I wonder a little bit if this is a generalization, but if people who see themselves as left wing, it's a really it's a gut thing, it's a heart
Yeah.
and soul thing. It's like,
Yeah.
you feel really strongly about it, and sometimes we're not very good at explaining the heart and soul
Well, because
stuff.
you get so kind of passionate.
You do.
And I had a debate, I'm using the finger things here, with some people the other day about something, and I was totally in the right, and if I would have just calmed down and explained my
Yeah.
position, I would have but I just got, when I was yelling and
Get
then
all
rolling on the
worked out,
ground
right?
and
Yeah.
spilling my beer,
You
Because
lost
you
your
really
cool,
care
don't
about
you?
it. It really,
Yeah.
really matters. And so that's why some people say to us, I don't know what Labour stands for anymore. Sometimes I think because we think it's such a given, why wouldn't you want to put people first? Why wouldn't you want to be focused on making sure everyone has decent incomes. You know, we sometimes forget that we do need to explain why that stuff's important, because for us it's so instinctive.
Yeah.
that
Especially
makes
if you
sense.
grow up around it.
Yeah,
Because I was the same, like my parents are political. So like we just grew up around politics, and so you're sort of like, there's so much you just assume is
you
just
assume a lot.
knowledge, that you
Yeah.
just know.
Yeah.
I think, like, I was talking to my brother recently, and he's still down in New Plymouth, and he grew up in the same neighborhood as I did. All his friends are from, like, really poor families, like the state housing area.
Yeah.
And he was telling me that the last election, heaps of his, like, childhood friends voted National because they've, like, grown up amongst that poverty, and then they get a job and they like get a house and they like doing okay, by their standards,
Yeah.
as from what they've seen, and then they're like, this is in my interest when
Yeah.
they're not educated on the fact that
Yeah, I think the thing that frustrates me is that, voting Labour is not to say that you think that, it's a party that's all about only helping one group of people. Our view has always been that everyone's better off when everyone's doing a little bit better.
Yeah, no doubt.
Actually, a lot better for a lot of people, a lot better. And that, you should never forget what a difference some of that support makes to you. And you should always pay it forward with your vote, I think.
Totally.
But it doesn't make you worse off to vote for Labour as well. I mean, that's the
Yeah.
crazy thing. It's just some people have very old ideas about, well, when you're poor, you vote Labour, and when you're rich, you vote National.
Yeah.
Well, actually, if you want to look at the facts, economic growth, for instance, in New Zealand, always been stronger under Labour governments, always. And that's not what people instinctively think. So we've always got the balance right between making sure we put people first, but that actually the country's doing well enough that we all do better at the same time.
Yeah.
So anyway, you don't have to be a selfish voter.
Yeah, but there's such a thing now, right?
Yeah.
It's
You
either
shouldn't be a selfish
people
voter.
People are so disillusioned that they're not voting, and then the people that are voting are just sort of like self-interest.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
And so it does. Yeah.
And
In
how do you
fact-
think we can reach all those people that aren't voting? Because I mean, I think this election we just did so much. Like, there's so many benefit concerts and people doing songs and writing, and it felt like there's this real groundswell.
Yeah,
Worse than the year. election
Yeah,
before.
I
Well,
would-
we did do, and some good came out of that. Some good really did come out of that, because, we had a bit of a trend that was really dangerous with young people not engaging at all.
Yeah.
Do you know what I reckon the problem is? I think people don't think it makes a difference. They think
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
not showing up showing up on election day doesn't change anything that's going on for them. And I think if you peel that back and go, well, why do people think it's going to be the same? Well, they don't understand the difference between the parties. That's a big part of it. And yet there are big differences. They think it'll be the same either way. They don't realise how much politics affects them. And I say, so I'll do a little exercise with someone who's like, tells me they're not going to vote. And I can, in one conversation, you can find 5 things in their day that has been affected by a political decision somewhere. Whether or not you can afford to go to university or polytech or be an apprentice. The fact you can even be an apprentice, whether or not you're earning minimum wage, how much your rent is, whether you can ever buy a house, whether you've got any savings for when you get old, how much it costs you to go to the doctor. Everything has been touched by a politician in some way.
But do you think, though, that, I mean, my mother was talking about it at the last election. She was saying she feels a lot of the reason why these people aren't voting is because under the Labour government, it didn't really change that much for the bottom, spectrum of society. And so those people are like, like they've been through 2 different administrations, and they're like, oh, it didn't change for us.
I think stuff, when it did change slowly. It was slow.
Yeah.
And I think the reason that was is we'd had a lot of Labour governments who'd gone, the Labour Party worked really hard to get into government. They got into government, they changed things really quickly, and people freaked out and turfed them out.
Yeah.
And then once you're turfed out, everything then gets unpicked. And so Helen, I think when she came in, she was like, right, I'm going to bring people with me. So it's going to be a bit slow and steady. But when you think about some of the stuff that she did, working for families, for instance, nothing made as much of a difference to child poverty as that package. Nothing that we've done in decades has made the difference that made to getting kids out of poverty. We admit that we needed to do more. Absolutely, but that made a really big dent in it, and even the national government now has to acknowledge that it made a big difference.
They admit that?
Yep.
John Key just likes to dismiss anything and everything,
Well,
right?
Well, they hated working for families because working for families was basically was a set of tax credits. It meant that families who were poor basically paid, in some cases, no tax at all, the way it worked. He hated it. He said that. National said they hated it. But when they came in, they acknowledged that actually that was the thing that saved a lot of people during the recession, so they didn't get rid of it.
Yeah,
so that's the highest praise you can get, is when another party doesn't ditch what you've done.
Yeah, totally.
But even things like KiwiSaver, most people won't see how that affects them until for a lot of decades yet. But that will mean that a lot of old people aren't in poverty when they retire.
Yeah.
I thought the exciting policy that you were talking about before the last election was the housing one.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's something that's just
Yeah,
so dire.
totally.
And it's crazy people don't even acknowledge that, you know what I mean? Like,
It's a big problem, so we have to do something big, and that's the difference between Labour and national governments, is that Labour's quite hands-on. If we see a problem, we're like, okay, market has failed. We just need to go in and build houses ourselves.
Yeah.
And people freak out and think, oh, government shouldn't do things like that. That's not a job for them. Well, we did post World War II. That's exactly what we did. We built heaps of houses, and we still live in them today. So why not do it again?
Yeah, I think hands-on politics is so incredible. Like the last few weeks, Dom and I have been hanging out with a original member of the Black Panthers.
Yep.
And like the reason they got so large was because of the community work, like feeding people, like housing people, free medical care. And that was how they became so powerful and like such a threat to the status quo was because they actually went out and did shit.
And understand what people really need. And again, that's other stuff Labour did when we were last in, trying to make healthcare, free for kids. And slowly working up to try and make it cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. All the basic stuff, and we can't lose sight of basics. Being able to afford a house, have free education and decent healthcare. We
so do you
can't
think
take
that's
for granted.
Labour's going to really move away from that neoliberal kind of doctrine that we've had?
Yeah, I think, I never really thought that we've subscribed to it fully anyway.
But in the past, though, I mean, Rogernomics kind of introduced it.
Okay. If you're going, that's not Labour to me. So when you say Labour, I think, probably, Helen. When you go back to the 80s, most members of the Labour Party acknowledged that was an incredibly difficult time for us as a party. It really splintered away from our values. There was some stuff in there that happened out of absolute necessity, but the other stuff, the stuff that left communities devastated, like the one that I lived in Murupara, that wasn't Labour.
Yeah.
That wasn't. And it was a very different time. But it's a part of our history, I can't ignore that, but it's not what I consider to be the Labour Party. Yeah.
I've got a question. A friend of mine asked me, we'll have to beep that out actually, Dan, she won't want me to put a name in there. But,
This is going to be a hard-ass question.
well, no, it's not. It's just, I have to read
You
it.
can ask
because-
those if you'd like.
I have to read it because I want to get the term wrong. But she said, personally, do you think universal basic income is a viable policy for Aotearoa?
Can we explain what that is first?
Yeah. So universal basic income is the idea that basically everyone, when they are a certain age, receives a certain amount of money from the state, and then you don't have any welfare state. So everyone gets a certain amount of money. Whether you choose to then work to beef that up to survive is your call.
Does a country have that, or someone almost got it? Like, I'm sure some Western European country is.
Well, here, Gareth Morgan's been talking about a universal income. He wrote a book called The Big Kahuna, which was about this idea.
It's not about that ice cream, eh?
No. You could give everyone an ice cream at the same time.
People love ice cream.
People
and
do
it
love
could be
ice
a good
cream.
election tool next time.
Yeah, it might be considered bribery, but that's okay.
It's more of Nationals vibe.
Yeah. Bribery. Don't you have to pay them, though?
You're not, and it is in the law. You're not allowed to provide more than a light supper to voters during election time.
Oh, shit.
Yeah, it's actually defined.
But you can pay $50,000 and have dinner with John Key.
But some people that would buy a light supper. So the idea is so that you have a tax system that means that you can afford then to pay a universal basic income. And from memory, we're talking like $11,000 a person, from memory, something like that. I think some of the issues, I think it's a really interesting idea, but some of the issues with it include if you are unwell or disabled or, for instance, or a sole parent, can you survive on that amount of money?
So it's below minimum wage.
Yeah, and you couldn't.
Yeah.
And so I remember asking Gareth Morgan about that question. I said, well, for instance, if you're a sole parent, you can't raise a child on that. And he had this view that people would be forced then to come together in kind of boarding situations and figure it out. I don't think there's dignity in that. So I think you either have to form a system where people can survive or it doesn't work, because, there are people who are, have terminal illnesses or disabilities, and they don't deserve to live an undignified life because of that. So, and to get a tax system that would mean that you're able to afford to do that is pretty difficult. Now, that's not to write off the idea, because there's something in the idea of saying, well, actually, we're not going to judge anyone. And that's what if you take away the welfare state, which in New Zealand does have a lot of judgment in it, and say everyone gets the same, and then the rest is up to you. There's something interesting in that, because then there's no stigma anymore.
Yeah. And I guess if someone just wants to live a creative life, or wants to do something else with their life,
Yep. So there's lots of interesting. It's definitely worth us debating. Yeah. But it's how do you make it work?
Yeah. Well, the stigma of welfare is fucking enormous. Like you go into poor communities, and it's just like. And it's like that mindset can overwhelm a whole small community, and people don't have anything to aspire to other than welfare or... Yeah, so that's something that definitely needs to be addressed, I think. And
I think we have to give people hope, I think
and dignity.
And dignity.
Yeah.
And if you strip it all away, I mean, those are some of the biggest things that we've lost.
Yeah.
But I do think we can get that back. It was only in the 70s that I watched this interview with Norman Kirk, Big Norm, who was, a Labour Prime Minister that my dad loved so much that he named our cat Norm. And of course, I have no memory of him, but he sounded like such a wonderful leader. And I watched an interview with him once by a BBC interviewer, Frost, who came over to New Zealand, did this interview with him, and he said, what's been the most memorable part of being Prime Minister? And Big Norm says, it would have been the time that at Christmas we gave those on welfare an extra payment at Christmas. And he said the letters that I got were overwhelming, including a woman who said that she'd managed to buy a new pair of shoes for the first time in 7 years. Now, imagine a Prime Minister that was so moved by a letter that would be the one thing that stuck in his mind of everything that he did, but also who was... had enough of a backbone to say, actually, this group of people deserve something extra at Christmas time. Now, imagine a Prime Minister doing that now. Imagine a Prime Minister saying, I'm going to give a bonus payment to anyone who's in the welfare system, and what New Zealanders would do. And I think that shows how far we've moved in 30 years.
Well, it's so easy, like, particularly national government, just making scapegoats of people on welfare.
Yeah,
and
people with no voice, because it's just like, there's no danger in it.
And people don't believe the actual poverty that is out there. Like, one thing that sticks out in my mind was when I lived in state housing area in New Plymouth, and I saw this girl.
That's where I learnt to door knock.
Yeah, right.
In that area.
Oh, okay. With Harry?
Actually.
He was a teacher at my school when I was at high school. Yeah, lovely man.
He is.
But and I saw this girl from the neighborhood that I knew, and it was her birthday, and I was like, happy birthday. I won't say her name. And I was like, what'd you get for your birthday? And she was like, pack of biscuits. And she had this pack of, not even chocolate biscuits, the fucking shitty, those crispy ones. And
Crispies.
They're horrible. That was her birthday present.
That's awful, yeah.
And like, I know it's birthdays and whatever, but I think people don't believe that people are that poor and doing it that hard, and
yet we're such a small country that we should all know what's going on.
But it's crazy even for me, like, because I've spent, like, we used to like do gigs and record quite a bit out south, and then lately I hadn't been out for a while, and I just assumed that it would have got a bit better because everywhere's getting gentrified, even in Onehunga and stuff. Went out there, and if anything, it's worse.
Yeah.
When we were like teaching the kids out there, it was just
worse, but still really expensive. Still really hard to even pay for rent out there.
Is it still the rent's still high out there?
Oh yeah, everywhere in Auckland. In Auckland is expensive. Yeah. So I absolutely agree. If I could, do one thing to change people's mindsets on things like that, just even taking people door knocking. You walk around and get a sense of the way people are living, because you get right up into their homes and people invite you in, and you get a sense of the fact that people really are doing it tough by doing things like that. But at the same time, not everyone is closed off to the idea that people are doing it tough.
Yeah.
The central Auckland, where I run, which includes Ponsonby and Herne Bay and some of the richest parts of the country, is the most marginal seat in New Zealand. So Labour almost won one of the wealthiest seats in the country.
Yeah.
And when I door knock and I ask people what they're worried about, poverty is a big part of that. So we still have a country where people are willing to say, I might be doing okay, but I'm worried that other people aren't. And that's what we've got to capitalise on. We've got to build on that, because that's the only way we're going to deal with inequality, is by people recognising that they are worse off if the people sitting below them aren't doing better.
What do you think it is about that area, like Central Auckland? Is it the population of young people that they...
Yeah. Well, if you look at the straight demographics, Auckland Central is quite young.
Yeah.
Pretty well educated, by and large. There are definitely pockets of poverty in the city, though. Big pockets you don't see it though because it's in apartment buildings. But when you door knock it, you can see it. It's people, living in really cramped, crowded conditions. But by and large, it's pretty atheist, pretty educated, and pretty young. So I think people are really thinking about issues like inequality.
I think some of the history of it is still like a little bit there, even though
Grey Lynn
it's been gentrified so much.
Yeah, totally. Even Freeman's Bay, used to have massive boarding houses through it, and totally different to now.
Yeah, definitely.
That doesn't mean you have to lose sight of the important stuff. That's all. So.
I was reading on your Wikipedia page, it said you were the president of the Socialist Union in England.
Oh,
yeah.
So what is your personal politics like? Is there an ideology?
I've got my own.
Are you allowed to say?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was the president of the International Union of Socialist Youth. So when I came back to New Zealand,
At what age was that?
I was in my early 20s. Yeah.
Can I have one too, Dan?
So just water's going around for the listeners. So I would call myself a pragmatic idealist.
Okay.
Yeah. I definitely, I'm obviously left wing. I'm at heart an idealist, but because I'm small town, I'm pragmatic about how you get things done and how long it can take sometimes.
Is how much compromise is involved in as being part of a political party? Like there has to be some for everyone, right? Because it's a mass ideal or whatever, and it's so everyone must have to compromise somewhat to be a part of it, right?
I think the biggest compromise you have to make as a party is this is what we want to achieve, but actually to get there you always have to worry about whether or not people are going to vote for it. So if you think that something that you want to do is a bit unpopular, you have to spend a long time convincing people, and that's a gamble.
Yeah.
For instance, one of the big things we gambled on back in 2011 was, can we win an election introducing a new tax? We said we want to bring in capital gains tax.
Yeah.
Well, and it's crazy to ever campaign on bringing in a new tax, but it was the right thing to do. So we were like, no, we're going to do it. So that was one of those ones where we thought we'll take a gamble because it's the right thing to do, but it's sometimes hard to get people to vote for the right thing to do.
Isn't it crazy that...
You just cut me off and get going.
He's excited about capital gains tax.
Yeah, isn't it Yeah, I am. Isn't it crazy, though, that it's risky to campaign on that, but it's fucking safe to campaign on we're going to kick people off the dole?
But it's also, if you look at the countries that are, doing the best economically, they've all got really high taxes. It's like, how can people not put two and two together?
In fact, it's only us, Switzerland and Turkey as developed nations that don't have a capital gains tax. So it's still something, that there's lots of debate around, absolutely. So that's the kind of stuff you're compromising. It's, what do we think we can really have a good debate about and bring people with us. Yeah. That's where you have to make trade-offs sometimes.
Do you think ultimately, though, a capitalist system is the best one to sort of achieve some kind of equality?
Look, my view, I mean, it's certainly flawed. So is, the democracy is an imperfect thing as well. But I think what we've got to do more of is make the system work for us.
Yeah.
And that's what we haven't been good at. New Zealand is so small that there's lots of ways we can intervene. There's lots of ways we can go, like housing. just leaving it to the market hasn't worked. So let's jump in there and do something differently. Or, we even had some ideas on how we could keep inflation low without all of the money going to banks, ways that we could keep it in the New Zealand system. So that was one of the things that we called it a variable savings rate. Pretty unique, almost completely unique system. But New Zealand's small enough that we can do that. So I guess my problem is that with the current system is that we don't intervene enough for people and make it work for us. So that's where capitalism falls down, but we can fix that. We can change that.
So you believe ultimately you can reform capitalism to make it a fairer system?
Well, to New Zealand styles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But do you not think, though, that some of the other powers would intervene if it sort of got too far to the left, like they do elsewhere?
Well, I think that's called an election where you lose. Yeah, absolutely.
No, I mean outside of New Zealand.
Outside of New Zealand, intervene in whether in the way that.
I don't know if America would be that keen, or even Australia, if we sort of.
Well, that's why we've got to be so careful to guard our economic sovereignty. That's why things like the TPPA are such a worry. At the moment, the international rules which we're stuck with, that we've signed up to, exist predominantly around good things: human rights, rights for the child, Indigenous rights, and then trade laws and things like that. Now, we've signed up to a set of trade laws, but they still, by and large, allow us to make pretty, sensible decisions for New Zealand. The TPPA is very different because it's not about state to state power. It's about state to corporate power, and that's a dangerous thing.
So in a nutshell, do you think you could sum it up for our listeners what the TPPA is? Because a lot of people don't know.
Happy to do that. So New Zealand signs lots of free trade agreements. The reason we do that is it means that when our people export to other countries, they don't get pinged with lots of trade barriers that cost them a lot of money. Now, because New Zealand doesn't have a lot of those barriers anymore, most of our free trade agreements predominantly just benefit us because we already, in the 80s, became pretty open. So, for instance, when we signed up to a free trade agreement with China, Labour was the one that did that. And we wanted to make sure that we'd get the most out of it. So when we were negotiating that agreement, and most of the negotiations do happen behind closed doors, we brought in Council of Trade Unions and we brought in groups like Greenpeace and we involved them. We let them know what was going on with the negotiations. So we brought in civil society into that chat and negotiated a deal that's ended up being really beneficial to New Zealand exporters. The difference with the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement is it's not just New Zealand and, say, one country. It's a multi-country agreement. And it includes in there some rules that don't just apply to countries, but would apply to, that would give rights to corporates. And so a lot of people are concerned, for instance, that if we sign this agreement, would we still be able to make a decision that was good for New Zealand that might have an impact on a corporate entity? Like, for instance, we want plain packaging on cigarettes. Would the TPPA then allow a corporate to argue that we'd created commercial disadvantage for them and basically challenge New Zealand's decision to do that?
So it's essentially just signing away your sovereignty to corporates.
If some of the rumours around what's in there are true, then that is absolutely
So people don't know what's actually in there.
No,
either.
we don't know.
So there's no transparency.
So unlike when we brought in other people, when we negotiated, we did it, pretty tightly, but we brought in people. They're not doing that, so we don't know. We don't know, for instance, whether or not Pharmac, which is the group that we've built up in New Zealand that bulk buys pharmaceuticals for the country to make it cheaper, whether or not they could be challenged as being a monopoly, for instance. Things like that are really bad for us. We don't know. And so we've kept saying to the government, show us what's in the text, because we're really nervous about what we've heard.
Isn't what they know, isn't it through the leaks, is it through WikiLeaks or Snowden?
There have been some leaks, and someone called Jane Kelsey's been doing a lot of work on it and has been talking a lot about what's contained in there. So, we've said we wouldn't sign anything that gives away our economic sovereignty. And it's different to anything we've ever signed as well. So that's a really short version of the TPPA.
That's a huge thing with this national government is a lack of transparency. And the scariest thing, I think, is the apathy of the general public. People don't even seem to fucking care. John Key just dismissed something like you just be like, ISIS, and everyone's like,
Well, when I was at that protest the other day, the one I called John Key a scumbag, I was like, this is so much fun. Like yelling at, like, two of the best things is yelling at cops and politicians. And there was like music there. And I was like, if people knew how much fun this was, they'd totally come down.
You know,
You
need
know?
to, like,
Politicians might go a little bit less, but
you need to get a like a good videographer there and like make a real, like how ISIS have done. They made their real.
You
slick-
reckon take some tips from ISIS?
Yeah, well,
promo tips.
man, their production values are tight. So I reckon if you did,
Todd
that-
made the mistake of watching an ISIS video and he hasn't been the same since.
I watched the one where they burnt the pilot alive.
oh no, that's
yeah.
awful. That is
It's
horrendous.
the most horrible thing I've ever seen.
I don't know
and-
why you would do that for. Like,
I don't
didn't you
know,
At
I
some
was-
point, you just be like, why am I
Yeah,
watching
I don't
this?
know, but I thought because
Oh,
like
look away.
I'd heard that
Oh.
they like had real good production values to the videos and stuff, and I was like, oh, maybe it'll make it seem like a movie, and
But it didn't, not at
It
all.
was way
That's
worse.
brutal. I mean, they
Yeah.
are the most brutal of organisations.
yeah, but you
They're
don't
just
have to
awful.
you don't have to worry about them now because we're sending out 140 guys.
Well, the thing that gets
it's all over now.
The thing that gets me is that the way that we will, because we opposed that decision, not because we don't. And I hate the way the Prime Minister has framed that as us not being opposed to that organisation.
Yeah,
of course
absolutely,
we are.
yeah.
Who could be in favour of such brutal acts? Their brutality is horrendous, but. It's not like we're fighting a war against a country who wants a land grab, and it's a terrorist organisation. The Iraqi army are not a completely well-formed, altogether non-corrupt organisation. The question we've got to ask is, what's the best thing we can do? And I just don't think sending troops over to train
No.
that army is the best thing we could
Well,
be doing.
but the way he painted it was like, oh, this is the very least we could do. It's like, what about aid or
Exactly. Yeah.
Or even just diplomacy.
Or-
just bringing people together.
Or if we're looking more broadly, what about taking a few more refugees from Syria, for instance?
Yeah, there was something especially disgusting about our Prime Minister and something embarrassing about him in Parliament screaming about, like, get some guts. And it's like, oh, really?
I was sitting, because I sit opposite John Key in Parliament.
Lucky.
I'm right next to Annie King, so it goes Andrew, Annie, and then me. And so he sits pretty much right opposite us. And that debate was so, it was awful. We're sitting there debating about sending these
People's
troops
lives,
off. People's
potentially,
lives,
yeah.
absolutely. So it's a big deal. And so to have John Key stand up and make out like we're copping out and that we're not interested in helping with this international crisis and that we need to get some guts was the most infuriating thing to have that screamed at you.
You should have got some guts and kicked them in the balls.
It made me pretty angry.
He should just have to send his son. It should be like a rule. If you're going to send people to war, you've got to send
for
one of your
real,
children
like-
as well.
Well, that's
They'll slow people
Well,
down.
we have to think about it in those terms, I think,
Because they're real people. One of our guests the other week, his brother's in New Zealand military. And so we're obviously already really anti that. But
Yeah.
then to hear someone talk about their brother and the possibility of him going over
Yeah.
there, that made it really real. And
Yeah.
it's like, fuck, this is actual people's
is.
lives. And it's just a political play.
Yeah, it is.
And you're
people's
playing
lives.
with people's lives. It's
Yeah.
incredible.
Yeah, the case wasn't made. We just said, look, let's have a proper debate. Let's have Parliament vote on it. Let's
Yeah.
just vote. And they wouldn't even let us vote.
Yeah.
So
how come they're allowed to do that? Is it just... Have they changed something or has it always been that way?
we get to well, yeah, I mean, because we put votes when we made those decisions. We put votes, and it at least means that you have a conversation with the other parties.
Yeah.
And you talk about why you're doing it, and you at least it forces you to have a bit more of a conversation. But there's Parliament votes when there are legal changes, when you're voting on a budget for the country, when there are certain things we vote on. Policy decisions, we don't have to have votes on that, but it would have been the right thing to do.
Definitely.
Yeah.
All right. Let's talk about you
It's been
a bit.
some heavy chat.
Yeah.
Heavy chat.
I reckon our listeners would like to know more about you as a person.
Okay.
So I think something I'm curious about is like, especially like a young person involved in politics, like how that's affected your life, because it's a very public thing, and especially the way people love to, discredit a politician
people
or
apart.
how has that affected your actual like day-to-day life?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things I worry the most about with politics is because I think politicians, we would want a parliament to be full of real human beings, who have lived their lives and who will have made mistakes and who will make mistakes while are politicians as well. And it just doesn't feel like it's a place that forgives being human particularly well.
Yeah.
So I'm lucky in some ways that I came in young,
Yeah.
because I mean I had to acclimatise quickly to that. I probably maybe had a little bit less to pick through in my life before, because just by virtue of being younger. But I was raised Mormon. That probably meant that my life was a bit more tame in the beginning, early years,
Right.
until I left. I left the church in my 20s, so. But yeah, I think that the thing that worries me is we don't want people who have just lived blameless lives of excellence, and we don't want people who are too paranoid to be in there.
Yeah.
And it does make you a bit paranoid.
Yeah, I bet.
I
Yeah,
can't
because
imagine-
you want people to focus on the work that you're doing, not the little bits on the side. And
Yeah.
it's the little bits on the side that really weigh on your mind sometimes.
Yeah.
I can imagine though that John Key and his friends don't have some skeletons in their closet. Like imagine how, because he wasn't he in the 80s, he was all part of the share market
But
stuff.
you know, I think the thing that gets
Yeah.
me is that in, a while ago, maybe even 10 years ago, it was or even before, it's a bit of an unspoken rule that you left politicians' families alone. They didn't choose the
Yeah.
job. They didn't want to be in the limelight. It wasn't their fault that their
Try
loved one was a bit
try
crazy.
telling Dominic that.
Well, there is that. And so, but that doesn't really exist anymore. And I feel a bit sad about that, actually. I
Yeah,
do.
well-
But
I
do you think that, like my reasoning?
And this isn't about you, Dom, but I do think that we'll probably, as much as we can.
His song's not actually about Max Key. Though.
Yeah.
It's a,
yeah, but I also feel though if your policies are going to affect my family and the family of my friends,
Ooh.
then I feel like your family is though your fair game to an extent. You know what I mean? Like if you're going to do policies like that are going to directly attack people, in their lives,
well, you know
and
what?
undermine their lives.
I think it's absolutely fair game to raise that, that we have families and we should know better than to do bad by people who have kids and are struggling, right? But
Totally.
but I think there's a difference between that and then, personally
So people-
confronting.
I guess I'm talking
individual-
about in art, not in like going to the street and spitting on someone or something.
Look, art is art absolutely is our political conscience, but I'm thinking of
people
scenarios.
protesting outside
Or,
John Key's house.
No,
What do you
actually,
think about
more,
that?
more things like, for instance, if a politician's child has a car accident, anyone else's child, if they had a car accident and they'd been driving recklessly, it wouldn't be a front page story.
Yeah.
But if you're a politician's child, a different set of standards gets applied to you. Or, for instance, if your marriage falls apart, it's suddenly in the newspaper.
Yeah.
Stuff like that
You know,
about
that's
people's
different.
personal lives.
Yeah.
But
I
that's
don't
just 'cause
feel
our
good
media
about
is,
that.
Our
Yeah.
media is just
Yeah.
so
Bored.
incompetent
Yeah.
and useless.
Yeah.
Hacks.
There's so if you go into
And
New
as for,
Zealand-
as for protesting outside politicians' houses, I mean, I think it's a better idea to protest outside their offices. I think there are options there.
But do you think that the way...
personally all for protests, making sure people's voices are heard, but I think just accepting that politicians still are human beings. That's all.
there's
But
that-
if they dehumanize other people, though, don't you think? And if also they're taking voices away from other people, that things become more desperate, and then the measures that you take to protest that become more desperate.
I think you sometimes, to a certain point, undermine your cause if you get distracted by the fact that the legality of what you're doing or something like that. I say do what you need to do, but don't dilute the message by becoming about something else. For
Yeah.
instance, if people start feeling sorry for the person you're protesting against because of the way you've done it, then you start losing the battle.
That's a good point.
Yeah. If that makes sense.
No, totally.
Absolutely. So right here where we are in Only Hunger, did you see the national offices across the road? Did they see you coming in?
I didn't look, to be
Okay.
honest.
There's a lot
Should I
against the
have looked?
window.
Yeah, they were like, the fuck's going on here?
Dan
Do they watch you quite a bit, do they?
Well, Dan's had some run-ins with them, like vandalising their place, and
Yeah. Dan's not as mild-mannered and kind
he
as
looks,
he,
he
as
might
he
be
looks.
wearing
No.
glasses and a
Dan, I
slick
can't condone
haircut.
vandalism.
We got a
Just for the record.
we got a segment for this
Oh,
week. It's one where we go and find like the most ridiculous news story we can possibly find,
Okay.
like a local one. So,
Do you want to read it?
but okay,
You're closer.
I don't reckon I can give it as much.
Oh, I'll try and read it
You
from
do
here.
it. Yeah, okay. I made the.
It's quite big font.
Yeah.
So it's in the Wanganui Times.
Yeah.
Local boy fights pig. Police were surprised when they were called to disturbance to find a 10-year-old fighting a pig. One of the officers, Sergeant Roberts, said he was a big boy for his age. He gave that poor pig quite a shit kicking. The boy, Dennis Lumps, was described as built like a brick shithouse and dressed in nothing but a cape and gumboots. The mother, Tracy Lumps, said the fight apparently started when the pig ate the child's cheese sandwich. She said Dennis would often eat up to 20 kgs of cheese in one day. It's pretty fucking disgusting, Tracy told reporters this afternoon, but I think it's partly what gives him the strength to fight those swines. Dennis declined to comment.
Is that an actual story?
Yeah, Wanganui.
Wanganui.
Actual.
Actually,
Is that not?
our next guest.
I don't think it's physically possible to eat that much cheese in a day.
Oh,
Well, she's probably exaggerating.
Tell young Dennis that.
Yeah.
There's quite a lot of profanity in that.
Wanganui's a rough place.
Yeah, man. You been down there lately?
Probably last year.
Aren't you
year.
from Wanganui, Sam?
No.
Whangarei. Oh, right.
Very
It says
different.
It starts with a W. There's like 100 places in New Zealand.
Me and-
I was Wanganui last year is when I was last down there. I did not see any
Pig
cheese
fighting?
eating. Pig fighting.
I know you have to be diplomatic, but what would you say is worse out of Wanganui and Palmerston North? What's the biggest shithole?
Between Wanganui and Palmerston North.
Are you asking
Do you know what? I'm
questions now?
gonna share a little story so that you know
Okay.
why I don't comment on provincial New Zealand in those terms anymore.
I reckon I have free license to because I'm from New Plymouth.
You think that, you see.
Okay.
I thought maybe because I lived very near Hamilton and was born there that I had a bit of free license.
Worst
But I was
place
at
in the
Select
world.
Committee one day and Maurice Williamson was talking about, we were asking him about housing affordability. So there were reporters in the room. And he said, look, I've been over to America and I've seen that they've got these big cookie cutter housing areas and I don't think New Zealand's ready for that yet. And I said, ready for it, we've already got it, it's called Hamilton. People, there's a bit of a chuckle, thought nothing more of it until the Waikato Times heard about it. Front page story, the mayor got stuck into me. I got into all sorts of trouble. And one journalist called me and asked me to explain my comments. I said, of course, I did not mean all of Hamilton, just some of the newer areas that have... They asked me to name the areas, which I refused to do. And so colleagues started suggesting that I just start saying that it wasn't as bad as other towns. And I thought, well, that was just going to dig the hole deeper for myself. So I chose not to do that. So even though it was my place of birth, I got in lots of trouble. So...
You just got to choose somewhere with the smallest population. Oh, at least it's not as bad as fucking whatever it's called.
And make up a town that no one's ever
Yeah,
heard of.
yeah, make up a
so
place.
I don't think I'm going to answer that question for my own safety because
That's all
these
right,
things go
yeah.
badly wrong.
See, that must be the hardest thing about your job, though, is you have to be so diplomatic all the time.
Yeah, would be terrible at that job, eh?
We'd like
Yeah, I wonder what New Zealand would be like if everyone felt like they had to be diplomatic all the time. Would be like the English.
Yeah.
Stop touching that. I'm touching my microphone.
The
So-
small town thing got you all agitated, eh?
Yeah, I just got
You actually
nervous.
wanted to throw the mic into
really
the wall and
nice.
say, fuck Hamilton.
No, actually, I just got nervous. That's what it was.
Okay, sweet. Oh, shit.
How are we doing for time, Dan?
50.
50? So 5 more minutes?
It's up to you.
All right.
It's going
Have you got 5 more minutes?
Sure thing.
All right. Have you got any more questions, Todd?
No,
Before we
because
start-
I need to... Can I have a whiskey?
Yeah.
Please.
All right. I'll have a look.
Thank
I've
you,
got some more
guys.
questions down. I think we've gone
For
through
the
all of them.
listeners, I'm not drinking the whiskey.
Yeah, Jacinda's not drinking for the record.
Oh, yeah. Are you allowed... What do you think of Nikki Kay? Are you allowed to comment or you...
Oh, which,
Who would win out of a
honest, this is
fight?
an honest statement. I think, obviously I have a big problem with a lot of politicians' politics. I don't agree with what they think. But you have to, when you do the job, you have to have a begrudging respect for other people that do the job because it's hard, and no matter what side you're on, it's still a hard job to do. So, yeah, we disagree on lots of issues.
Like feeding poor people.
But I do... like feed the kids, but I do think that she does work hard. She works in the same area as me, so I know that about her.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I don't really know her. It's hard to get to know someone that you run against because immediately you're in this competition.
I went to this debate at the university and it was socialism versus capitalism. And the socialist team were pretty terrible as well. But she was on the capitalist team and she was just... You could tell that she just kind of didn't really understand that it was it's just one system and there can be other systems. And her argument... actually everyone's argument was pretty terrible. But yeah, I actually felt sorry for her. My friend went up to her
That's
afterwards.
what happens with socialism.
Richie, I went
the
up to her
debate.
afterwards and gave her a hug.
Did he?
Because she looked so
Do you reckon
lost.
that's why the socialist debate team sucks? Because they're giving everyone a chance?
Just too polite.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, they weren't that polite.
It's funny when you talk capitalism versus socialism, whenever we talk in those terms, people, I think, switch off a little bit. That's why before when we were talking about capitalism, for me, it's about just doing things that work our way for people, which actually is democratic socialism.
Yeah.
Right? But as soon as you use language like that, having been president of the Socialist Youth and knowing that in New Zealand people freak out at the word socialism.
It's weird though, eh?
Actually, you're right. It's totally just a political system, but people freak out about it. So that's why talking about ideas and the way that we need to change the system in a New Zealand context, it's a lot easier, I think, than using, which is sad. You know, it's probably because we don't talk about it enough in our schools for people to see it's not a dirty term.
It's definitely an education thing.
Yeah, it is.
And also the Nazis fucked that term up for everyone. National socialism.
Well, and in Europe, you know, countries, you know, use terms, you know, their parties are called socialist parties, democratic socialist parties, and yet we don't use that language here. Yeah. So that's why I guess I talk about it in different terms.
Is it the same for feminist politics? Like,
I think that has been hijacked, and yet we still need feminists because the feminist movement's about equality. How can you disagree with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
It seems much stronger now, though, the feminist movement, than 10 years ago. You know, I mean, I know it's obviously, maybe it was stronger 10 years before that again, but, you know, like it's actually in the media now and people are talking about it. And I'd like to think so, and yet then I'll be in a room and I'll ask the young woman in front of me, do you consider yourself feminist? And very few people will put their hand up. I think somewhere along the way we decided you couldn't be feminine and be a feminist. It got hijacked as a term, you know, which I think is really unfortunate. Yeah. I'd happily say that I'm a feminist.
That's cool.
Yeah, I call myself a feminist in the
Good.
Herald.
I think guys can be feminists. I've never been a supporter of this idea that only women can be feminists.
Well, the Herald had an article, and it was like they're asking a bunch of different guys, do they consider themselves feminists? And I was real nervous about my answer because I said, yeah, I'm a feminist and I believe in equality and I think patriarchy fucks over everyone. And I was like, oh, that's a pretty shallow answer. And the rest of the people were just like, oh, I would never do that. I mean, I think that girls should be able to do whatever they want. I was just like, the worst answers. And I was just like, I came across like real good. I was so nervous the day that came out. I just kept on checking my Twitter.
What was that in?
The Herald. You know, Sam Wicks's partner, Rebecca. She did a thing. She used to do that with column about feminism.
There was a piece about casual sexism not that long ago as well, where it's something that I often want to say more than I feel like I can say on, like, for instance, if some small newspaper puts a cartoon of you wearing stilettos in a bikini in a boxing ring, which happened to me.
Are you serious?
Well, that's the thing that's often come up around you is because I remember when after the last election, I know a lot of people were saying people were talking about you being the new leader of the Labour Party, and there was like, I don't know if you must have heard some of it, but people were talking about it, and then people were saying she's too young and she's attractive, and these are reasons why you couldn't lead a party, like, you know. And when it comes to men, there's no way that even factors into, like,
well, they're a bunch of ugly bastards anyway.
Well, there's lots of things that just you do get a different set of criteria, I think. And the thing that I struggle with a little bit is how much do you really publicly rally against that, or how much, if you do that, do you then risk being labelled as being, you know, humorless or feminazi, and so always trying to get that balance between calling out behaviour that's really bad when it happens, but doing it in a way that doesn't then
behind the
come
scenes
back at you. It's really hard to get that balance.
Because like politics is just another thing that like appears to be a fucking old boys club. So there must be heaps of weird shit in the political world dealing with those old men.
It's so much better than it used to be.
Right.
And I guess if you think about the fact that I was in my second term in, so like 4 years in, David Shearer came in and he promoted me. So I ended up being the most senior woman in the Labour Party, and I was the youngest woman. Cool. So there's lots of... It is far better than it used to be. And there's a lot of women who have done a lot, you know, had a lot harder time, but there's still more we can do. But you know, if I do this exercise with classrooms sometimes, if I said to you, like, what words do you think of when I say politician? What do you think of?
Old white guy.
And what else? What kind of characteristics do you think of?
Lying. No offense.
maybe some dispassionate descriptors.
Somewhat
dispassionate descriptors, like lots of time people will say to me assertive, like bold, confident, outspoken, stuff, probably egos as well.
Yeah.
But it's funny, like lots of the words they'll chuck at you are often words that you would associate with males.
Yeah.
Lots of those words. And so I still think that we have the predominant view in our brains around politics and politicians is still quite male dominated.
Yeah.
Which is why, interestingly, people will still say to me, "Oh, Jacinda, I think you need to be a little bit more hard-lined. You need to be more of an ass kicker. You need to be more of a," they revert back to this idea of what politics needs to be. Whereas I think we just need to change that view.
But maybe you're the person to do it then, because if you guys get elected and then you're there and you're not playing into that role, that's going to really influence
I think
that next generation of people.
Yeah, I think if we all start being more mindful of that, we can change the system a bit, and how else, and this comes back to the thing we were talking about in the very beginning, if we want people to be engaged and feel like politics matters and that they want to vote, I think we have to at the same time try and be people they want to respect as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, in a small way, that's why that's why we started the podcast, in a small way to try and get that kind of discussion out there, because it's just not, what I mean? And
when we're not talking about Willie Moon getting hit with 2x4.
We're not talking about fighting and dogs and stuff.
Yeah. Oh, and poor old Dennis from Wanganui.
Dennis? Oh, fucking
Dennis
Dennis,
Lumps.
yeah. The cheese eater.
20 kgs.
He's Dennis alone is keeping the New Zealand dairy industry alive. So
seriously, Ontario should find this guy.
Yeah.
He's doing them a service.
they should put him on there.
We could
Yeah.
get
The
cheese
SPCA
sponsorship.
probably wouldn't mind finding him as well.
Yeah, my mum, I sent that to my mum and she said, poor pig. So she texts back.
It's like poor pig.
Dominic's mother loves animals more than she loves her own children.
Well, not me. Just one of my sisters.
The other ones, yeah.
Likes you the best. Then
Yeah.
so it's you.
Don't look so
animals,
surprised,
and
Jacinda.
then- No. Quizzical. So it's
That's
you, animals, and then your sisters.
Well, she has like a notice board,
Uh-huh.
and so sometimes you go around and it'll be like heaps of pictures of me and then only a few of my sisters, and then sometimes you go around and it'll just be like one dog taking up the whole thing, and so that's how you know who's popular.
This is a thing in my family. When I'd lived in Australia for quite a while, and I came home and I stayed with my dad for a while, and I went into his office because that's where I was staying. He has like a little outdoor office thing. Went in there and there was heaps of pictures of my brother and his wife, and then like one picture of my sister, and then none of my sister, my other brother, or I. And I was like, isn't there a picture of me in here, Dad? And he's like, well, you got to send me one. I was like, so my brother and sister just send him photos, and he's like, so.
Well, he's got a good point.
Yeah, that's how it works with
Yeah.
my dad. You just got to give
No,
him
my
the
mum
picture.
goes-
It's not about love. It's just laziness.
Yeah, there's no way he's
My
gonna
mum
do
prints
it.
them out and
Yeah.
then puts them on the
That's
notice
loving.
board.
That's how you know
Well,
you're
not if
loved.
not if you're not on the notice board.
No,
not if you're just
yeah.
fucking fat Labradors.
Oh yeah, I guess that's darker than if you're not on
Tell your
the...
sisters to get animal onesies.
Oh, I mean, sometimes my sisters
Just
move
deeper
up.
into it.
Cool. Should we wrap it up?
Yeah, what's the time on that, Dan?
58.
Cool.
Yeah, that's heaps. That's bang on point
Yeah.
once you put the song in.
That's going to be beautiful.
Thank you so much.
Hey,
Yeah.
it's been awesome to talk to you
That
guys.
was
Thank
really
you
cool.
for
Very
having me.
much.
Sorry if it got a bit heavy in places.
No, it's
No,
good.
that was really
That's-
good.
Like I say, that's kind of why we started doing it.
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome.
Hopefully we'll get you back in,
Yeah.
like after you win the seat, or maybe before.
Anytime.
Maybe just
Yeah,
before.
I'll come
on
in
the election.
anytime.
Yeah, next time though.
Let's do it in the evening and then I can have a whiskey with you.
Alright, cool.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
like whiskey.
Yeah.
It's up there. I was one of my faves.
Awesome.
All right.
Thank you
Thanks,
so
guys.
much.